Hello and welcome to this exploring workshop session looking at, once again, Act 5 of the Battle of Alcazar. If you'd like to know more about the Battle of Alcazar, we have done a first look exploring session of this play already, and we found many obstacles to our enjoyment of it because of the way the text has been damaged, and also because of our lack of knowledge about the background of the play. And so there are lots of issues that we're starting to deal with as we get towards a second look at this particular text. The other sort of pragmatic issue that we are trying to deal with today is how to do in a second look session a fast read through without doing stage directions and without really any rehearsal, how to do a battle or a series of skirmishes and battles in a way that we can all read very simply off our screens as we do our second look coming up sometime in the future. So this session is as much about how we're going to relay out our scripts, and Alan is on point. Give us a wave, Alan. Alan is on point to be making notes as we go along, as we try to decide how we're going to break up the action. We're also going to be deciding what bits of action we're going to be doing, because the text of Alcazar comes in from two different sources. We have the printed text, but we also have the plot, which details from the playhouse the kinds of on-stage physical actions, entrances and exits that might be going on. So we have 2 points of data, and so we can make a certain amount of decision making now as to what's worth trying to do on Zoom and what's not. So that's what this sequence is going to be all about. We're going to go through the whole of the text. We're going to do all of Act 5 from beginning to end with this wonderful team of people. We've already said hello to Alan. Also in the room is Helen.
Hey.
Alexandra.
Hello.
Eric.
Hi.
Emma.
Hello.
Elizabeth.
Hi there.
Lois.
Hello.
Dan.
Hiya.
And Rachael.
Hiya.
And I am your host, Robert, and we normally do slightly longer introductions when we do read-throughs, but today we're just our first names. That's you can sneak your second names in later if you want. It's entirely up to you. I won't hold it against you. So what we're going to do is we're going to just work through the text very, very slowly and make some decisions. So if you want to know the plot of the Battle of Alcazar, very simple. There's a battle of Alcazar, and there are various people involved in the Battle of Alcazar, and it goes very, very, very wrong for one side. And Act 5 is the battle portion. Acts 1 to 4 deal primarily with the build-up, with all these various armies ending up in this really insignificant place where they all have a battle. So the play has been leading up to this moment. So this act has to be exciting, he said. And so we're going to get to what is currently listed in our script as just simply Act 5 prologue. And so I just want to make a decision. We have this prologue, this chorus moment at the top of Act 5. Shall we just call it Scene 1? Or just for ease? Shall we make that decision, or do we have objections to that as an editorial procedure? Alexandra.
There is a thing labelled Scene 1. If that is something that got put in by us, I'm not sure. So if that is something that got put in by us, then sure, fine, we can remove that. Otherwise, there is already a Scene 1.
Yeah, but that again, that's an extra editorial thing from, not by us, but it seems to be. I don't personally have a problem in terms of in-house of calling Act 5, starting at the beginning of Act 5 and calling that Scene 1. We could call it Act 5 prologue, but I like numbers. They're neater on a spreadsheet. It may cause problems if we're intersecting with the Academy, but I think for in-house, unless anyone has any serious objections or prefer prologue. Everyone's happy with that. Alan, relabel Act 5 unlabeled as Scene 1, please. We will change Scene 1 to Scene 2 later.
Done so.
Excellent. So then we have a dumb show, and I'm going to ask Lois if you could read the presenter part of the dumb show. And thinking in our minds now, there are various stage directions which we won't read, but I just want to everyone be aware that in theory there's a visual side to what's going on here. For a second look, do we feel we need to do something to mark that? We're not going to do it now. We're just going to let Lois read this beautifully. No pressure, Lois. And see what we think at the end of it. So Act 5 opens with a presenter.
Ill be to him that so much ill bethinks, and ill betide this foul ambitious Moor, whose wily trains with smoothest course of speech have tied and tangled in a dangerous war the fierce and manly King of Portugal. Thunder and lightning? No, oh, I see. We don't read the stage directions. Okay. Now throw the heavens forth their lightning flames and thunder over Afric's fatal fields. Blood will have blood, foul murder scape no scourge. At last descendeth fame, as Iris did to finish fainting Dido's dying life. Fame from her stately bower doth descend, and on the tree as fruit new ripe to fall, placeth the crowns of these unhappy kings that erst she kept in eye of all the world. Now fiery stars and streaming comets blaze that threat the earth and princes of the same. Fire, fire about the axle tree of heaven whirls round, and from the foot of Cassiope in fatal hour consumes these fatal crowns. Down falls the diadem of Portugal. The crowns of Barbary and kingdoms fall. Ay me, that kingdoms may not stable stand. And now approaching near the dismal day, the bloody day wherein the battles join, Monday the 4th of August, 78, the sun shines wholly on the parched earth, the brightest planet in the highest heaven. The heathens, eager bent against their foe, give onset with great ordnance to the war. The Christians, with great noise of cannon shot, sound angry onsets to the enemy. Give ear, and hear how war begins his song, with dreadful clamors, noise, and trumpet sound.
And we'll just pause there. Now, in the original, the indications are that there's an awful lot of fireworks going off at this point, and visual things of crowns falling. Now, reading that, I because it's describing what is also happening visually, do we think for a Zoom we should attempt the visual side of this? We can very straightforwardly do the thunder, lightning and thunder. We can do the trumpets in some way, shape or form without too badly overlapping with the dialogue. What are the thoughts from the room about that? Alan, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think the sound effects should be reasonably easy to do in terms of thunder and trumpet. The thought that went through my mind is if we've got someone reading presenter who has got the level of kit necessary, which I haven't, for doing backgrounds, then potentially one could actually do backgrounds for the Fame Like an Angel, bring on a tree with crowns hung on it, a blazing star is another backdrop, fireworks is another backdrop, and then you've got variants on the tree, minus one crown and minus both crowns.
I'm wondering, actually, maybe it's not so much the person doing the presenter, maybe the presenter is invisible and just does the text, while some other lucky person does exactly what you were just suggesting.
Yeah, that's another possibility. It depends on whether you want the presenter as a scene presence or as a background narrator.
Yeah. I mean, they could be both. I mean, it could still be somebody else doing the visual thing and they could visually be there. Sorry, Helen.
You can't on a practical note, you can't change your backgrounds while reading a text. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But for me, listening to Lois read that, I felt that I'm trying to think of a polite word, any rubbish presentation that we might put out, you know, draw an angel, draw fame, draw a tree, this sort of thing, would just detract from what is very, very good stuff. And I'm reminded of other prologues in other plays which don't have dumb shows, and we don't expect dumb shows with them. And I say to myself, why even try and have this dumb show? We don't need it.
I feel Dan maybe wanting to leap in, but then Alexandra after.
Alexandra's first, yeah.
No, you go ahead, Dan.
No, go on.
I am with Helen on this in that it's for a large-scale production, it's very filmic, right? And you could do a very filmic thing on Zoom. I love the fact that we've even got the date, you know, that moment of the text fading in, kind of give you the date, text fades out. Very, very filmic. But do we need it? And the answer is not really, because the text describes the things that are seen. So there is nothing in the visuals that is not also spoken. And so for our purposes, you could very easily just not have any of the visuals.
Dan?
For this particular one, I'm going to agree with Helen on the fact that something rubbish, especially on Zoom, is for me personally, is a huge turn off to watch. And then I stop listening and I start thinking this is a rubbish production. I agree with Alexandra that we don't necessarily, I think, need a dumb show, although at least try to stage something like that. I do, however, think that dumb shows, and especially for this play in particular, are integral to the play. And this was my understanding as to why the play didn't work last time. I shouldn't say just dumb shows, I would say all sorts of visuals. So this relates back to what we were saying with the Courageous Turk of, if you can't visualize and it's not described for you, it's really, really hard to follow the plot or understand what type of importance the dumb show may have to this plot. So one would be to either pre-record something, but it would have to be done well, or two, but for other parts of the play that you need to have the dumb show, we can then revisit this discussion of how best to present it, whether it's just having a scrolling of the text on the screen as well, that much like you would do with Star Wars or something like that, or just even it's saying, like something that indicates that this is a dumb show. So imagine what you are hearing here. Or seeing rather, yeah.
Yeah, I think that it's a question for doing a second look when we don't really have much, it's more about the momentum of the thing, and we don't have that much prep time, is to say, where do we want to fight our battles? And this speech, for the most part, works very well on its own level. And I think that there are a couple of points in there which would... the element of the crowns might be, that's the only element there that I think would be quite useful. It is described, but it's not perhaps as clear as text without the visual to go with it. Alexandra?
I just wanted to add to Dan's point that yes, you also need to establish something as the system of what we're doing for the presenter moments, and then be consistent about that. So it would depend very much on what else is going on in the rest of the play and what else is needed for dumb shows and how much can be done on those, because it's no use if we can't. Let's imagine that we can absolutely do everything that this one kind of describes. If you then fall somewhere else, there's no point. You might as well find a system that works for all of them. And similarly, as Dan pointed out, if actually a lot of the play relies on those, then you can't just cut everything because it won't make any sense.
And there is a possibility with some of these dumb shows, actually, is that it could be something that could be semi-outsourced to a group of a few people, rather than something that's happening just within these sessions. Say to some people, we've got these dumb shows, you work on those by yourselves for a while, and if you can present something that's good as part of this second look, where most people are just running at it, because all you need there is the presenter to know what their text they're saying and make sure they're timing well with however many additional bodies are needed. Some of these dumb shows might need more than one. Some of them are, require actors acting in a visual way, and it might be a case that we just simply say at the beginning of the second look that we just go, look, we can't do these bits. These bits have visual, use your imagination for the moment. We'll get back to you. Maybe we'll do specific videos where we actually spend 2 hours getting 50 lines of text looking good and then release that at the end. Lois, then Helen.
Yeah, I was just wondering if it couldn't be done with something like, I don't know, silhouettes moving, or some obviously artificial thing. It's a sort of CGI kind of moment, but I would imagine that the popularity of the play had an awful lot to do with the dumb shows, in fact. So, one reason it's difficult to understand why people liked it so much, apart from, a great part for Edward Allen and some famous lines and moments, a lot of it must have been that it was a fantastic spectacle.
Yes, and if we were doing a shadow puppetry kind of thing, that's actually something that's if we arrange somebody's camera correctly, is something that is reversible and could look quite cute. It might not look perfect, but it would actually not look necessarily crap, which is what we're obviously trying to avoid, or at least within limits. Helen.
As I remember the earlier dumb shows, the especially one at the beginning, a tremendous amount of the motivation is in some murders carried on early on, and they only exist as dumb show.
Yeah, they're semi referenced, but they're not explained in the actual text that accompanies it, and you do actually see people being quite brutally murdered in a way that is quite important backstory.
So you can't actually do this play without dumb shows, really.
Yeah.
Unless you add text.
Yeah, this dumb show is nicely straightforward in that sense. It could be done without, and it wouldn't be the end of the world if it was done without. Whereas the much earlier one is another issue. That's another day. There's only so much text we can do in one session in detail.
Yeah, it's just that if we're making a decision for the play, then you have to take that in mind.
It's so we're already starting to get some good questions building there. I think, however, for the moment we will park this one. I think we can do it without, but if we are looking at all of the dumb shows separately, that might be something that we'll have to do as a separate session in the future before we get around to doing a second look. However, we're now going to move what we will now officially refer to as Act 5, Scene 2 in a moment. Alan.
Yeah, just a question. I think the sound effects probably are useful and doable.
Oh yes, I
think,
actually, could you just actually mark in yours, Lightning and Thunder? Could you just put SFX in front of that? And the same with actually the first cue that's technically at the beginning of Act 5, what is now Act 5, Scene 2, alarms. So
we got Thunder and Lightning, which is SFX.
Yeah. I don't think we need sound effects for all the fireworks. I think we can take those as they're a question for dumb show.
Right, and then
at the end we do need trumpet sounding because he says or she says trumpet sound, and that's quite important.
So alarms within SFX.
Rachael, do you want to ask a question?
I know we're moving on from this, but if you had like a roll of paper and then like two lights behind them, you could do that you could do something in like shadow or something like that for this scene. That would be pretty easy. There's like they sell like just giant sheets of like cheap newspaper, like paper but like clear, not printed on.
Oh yeah, there's enormous amounts that could be done with shadow puppetry and a bedsheet that could be made to actually look quite good. But again, it's a matter that we'd almost need to farm that out as a job, and that starts moving this away from what second looks are generally supposed to be, which is more about the pace and the flow of the thing, rather than trying to do a perfect show. which is not really what we're trying to do yet, he says. Dan?
Something that I've watched with other readings of other plays where stage directions and dumb shows are really relevant. It's like this play. I wonder if we are doing a second look of this and we don't have the time or the resources to outsource the dumb shows, whether it might be useful to actually specifically for the dumb shows speak out what is occurring there, at least in terms of the stage directions, but then delete the stage directions in other places. Just an idea.
I think with certainly the very opening dumb shows at the top of the play, that would be a very good thing to effectively adapt some of those spoken, to adapt some spoken dumb shows because those are quite important. I'm not sure about the others. That's a sort of case by case. I think that might be our route through for these dumb shows. It may not. We may make another decision. Alexandra.
It might also be possible and would still be in keeping with the thing of not speaking them out, just to have the text written out and appear in a sort of screen, in a vignette.
Well,
so that what you're getting is, by way of changing backgrounds and not having the person here, it's just an appearance of text, and then nobody's speaking it out, but we do have stage direction. This happens.
Yeah, to visually just present the stage directions. That's actually a thing we've not tried, and that might be a really good idea. That might be a solution. I like that as a solution. I'm going to look into that, because if one person is effectively in charge of putting up some placards, that's something that could be done while the text continues, but solves the problem of what we do with dumb shows. I like that. That's good. He makes a note. I will now get sued by the Beckett estate. Right. It's practically an entire Beckett play just happened there.
Well, you have a defence. You just turn around and say, no, not I.
Mm. And anyway, we'll move on to what is called Act 5, Scene 2 now, or will have been in a moment. So we have a stage direction. We've got alarms within, which we've to a degree dealt with. Let the chambers be discharged. So we've got gunfire as well. That potentially could be done. Gunfire is a bit tricky unless it's a recorded cue that we feed in, because loud, sudden, explosive noises Zoom does not like at all. So maybe that's a thing to be ignored. Basically, then enter to the battle and the Moors fly. We have skirmish still, and then we have the entrance of characters. So the question of how much of that information, we've got the one side flying, and there's a skirmish going on. And do we need to do just a simple, some people doing fighty things just to indicate a battle is occurring, or do we just simply have the entrance of the next characters to the next scene? What do we think is necessary or flows well? Alexandra.
Well, the question is what is necessary to the scene. So yes, that's kind of what will drive that. On a technical level, it would, again, be relatively easy to achieve. If we don't need to see people moving, it would be relatively easy to achieve with a still image, or even not that, of a battlefield, and just the noise. So you'd get alarms, the noise of cannon, the noise of people running, and then the two appear and start speaking.
The idea of us all standing there going, it's fine when we're doing a comedy. It's less good when we're doing something like that. So again, that might be a question that is essentially a separate cue for whoever's doing the slides, which now seems to be a thing that we are deciding, which it might be a solution to a lot of our second look session problems, actually, is that we just cheat with slides. Actions like that. Dan, then Eric.
Just to second that, and I don't even think of it necessarily as being as cheating, because this goes back to the theory that scene boards, I mean, there is some evidence for this, were a thing in early modern theater, where somebody would go on stage and announce what the act was, but then maybe that also serves as our way of indicating what has happened, rather than having some sort of terrible looking or cheesy looking performance or animation there. So yeah, I definitely agree with.
And they do it in film all the time, right?
Yeah.
Still.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yes, the sort of crossover that I see with, especially a lot of Queensmen play, but a lot of the plays from this sort of moment in the 1580s, 90s does seem to feel very filmic in so many ways, or at least they analog quite well, even if they're not directly connected. Eric, then Alan.
I was just gonna say you could probably use like what's called just like a sort of piece of paper and just like sort of a bit of drawing in the corner and just sort of go, you know, obviously this doesn't work because there's no drawing, but you know, sort of instead of complicating things, you just draw even just stick figures if you want, like whatever, and it's sort of just drawing it as a sort of, you know, motion picture kind of thing that is very old timey, but it's kind of effective for the old effect.
I quite like the idea of just setting up placards on a board that can be flipped, and one person, that's their job. You know, or if we can do it in a more technical way, then we can do it in a more technical way. But you know, ultimately we're looking for something that's really quick, really easy, and that we can repeat for different plays. This is without getting too technical, because that can go wrong as well. The nice thing about an analog solution is that ultimately, you know, unless something catches fire, it's probably going to still be in the room, and it'll probably be there, and it'll be fine. You know, coffee spillage might be an issue, but otherwise things can move forward. Okay, so we've got a solution there, and then we go into some action. And so I'm going to ask Helen if you could read Abdelmalec, and if I could ask Alan to read Zareo or Zareo, that's the one.
Yes,
I have entirely forgotten what Abdelmalec, who he is.
Worry not for this moment. We'll come back to that. Just let
I
the
don't
words.
even know which side he's on.
That's absolutely fine at this stage.
the name should be a bit of a clue. Doesn't look very European.
Yes,
But no, there are Arabic names on both sides.
Yeah, don't worry too much at this stage. Just you're in a chair. You're not very well. That's all that matters to this scene at this time. Do not worry too much about which side you're on. That's a whole separate kettle of fish. You're not well. You're not well. Okay. This scene has got some interesting textual problems, but we may or may not get to look at those. Let's just read through this mini scenette.
Who's Zareo?
That's Alan.
Say, Zareo, tell me all the news. Tell me what fury rangeth in our camp that hath enforced our Moors to turn their backs. Zareo, say, what chance did bode this ill? What ill enforced this dastard cowardice?
My lord, such chances as wilful war affords, such chances and misfortunes as attend on him, the god of battle and of arms. My lord, when with our ordnance fierce we sent our Moors with smaller shot, as thick as hail, follows apace to charge the Portugal, the valiant Duke, the devil of Aveiro, the bane of Barbary, fraughted, full of ire, breaks through the ranks, and with 500 horse, all men at arms, forward and full of might, assaults the middle wing and puts to flight 8,000 Hockerbus that served on foot, and 20,000 Moors with spear and shield, and therewithal the honour of the day.
Ah, Abdelmalec, dost thou live to hear this bitter process of this first attempt? Labour, my lords, to renew our force of fainting Moors, and fight it to the last. My horse, Zareo. Oh, the goal is lost. The goal is lost. Thou King of Portugal, thrice happy chance it is for thee and thine that heaven abates my strength and calls me hence. My sight doth fail. My soul, my feeble soul shall be released from prison on this earth. Farewell, vain world. for I have played my part.
And here we get to our first practical problem here. Abdelmalec dies, and he's just sort of there on stage, and then we have the stage direction of there's a long skirmish, and then his brother enters at that moment. Now the question is, do we need a long skirmish, or can in a production just go straight in, enter a brother? Do we think that is? Do we need that long skirmish?
A sound effect of clashing swords or something?
I'd say, do we even need that? I mean, I don't know what I can imagine on stage. It would be quite nice to have that sense of battle happening around this figure, and the question of what we're doing with this figure is not unimportant, because we have to decide what we do with the body. This is more of a problem than you'll think, for those who haven't read the play in advance. Alexandra.
Well, Zareo stays on, doesn't he? So it's, staging wise, it would be a bit strange to sort of go dead body on stage and also living person who does nothing while there is a long skirmish somewhere else. It's a bit, especially on Zoom, it's a bit weird. So I'm with you on this one, Rob. I don't think we need it.
So shall we say for Zoom, can you just put a cross line through a long skirmish? Keep the text in, but we'll say that.
I don't know how to do dashes on this word processor.
Just put it in
but
bold.
I put it in curly brackets.
Yeah. So it's going to be he dies, and then at a reasonable distance enter his brother into the scene. So both Abdelmalec, dead, is still on stage. So whoever's dead has to be in a position whereby they can still be seen, because this is quite important. Zareo stays on stage, but then Muly, Mahamet, Seth enters, and I was going to ask Alexandra to read that part and see what occurs.
Just one small question.
Do ask them. Don't let me railroad the room just by trying to move
It's
forward.
not a problem for Abdelmalec because he's actually sitting in a chair, isn't he?
Well, he may be sitting in a chair, or they may be about to put him into a chair. This is a question we'll resolve in a moment.
He's brought in a chair, so he could actually remain in the chair.
In theory, he's brought in his chair. There is a bit of dialogue in a moment.
I could have got up and then collapsed on the carpet.
Collapsed back in the chair.
More importantly, there's a line of dialogue that may indicate things in a moment. So, but it is a good point. Is he in a chair, or has he been carried on wounded? That's basically the implication. Yeah. And how can we convey that on screen? Is there a way of doing that? I don't think there is. Thoughts from the room?
A bloody bandage.
I think a bloody bandage is important. That's very much dealer's choice for whoever's playing that particular part at that point. It's a good note to put in place. Let's just read on a little bit further. So effectively the scene is continuing. Effectively the scene continues, but we're not worrying about a break in the action of a skirmish. So this is very much the action is continuing, flowing at reasonable pace. Enter Muly, Mahamet, Seth.
Brave Abdelmalec, thou thrice noble lord! Not such a wound was given to Barbary had 20 hosts of men been put to sword, as death, pale death, with fatal shaft hath given. Lo, dead is he, my brother, and my king, whom I might have revived with news I bring.
His honours and his types he hath resigned unto the world, and of a manly man, lo, in a twinkling, senseless stock we see.
You trusty soldiers of this warlike king, be counselled now by us in this advice. Let not his death be bruited in the camp, lest with the sudden sorrow of the news the army wholly be discomfited. My lord Zareo, thus I comfort you. Our Moors have bravely borne themselves in fight, likely to get the honour of the day. If aught may gotten be where loss is such, therefore in this apparel as he died, my noble brother will we here advance, and set him in his chair with cunning props, that our barbarians may behold their king, and think he doth repose him in his tent.
Right politic and good is your advice.
Go then to see it speedily performed. Brave lord, if Barbary recover this, thy soul with joy will sit and see the fight.
And there we'll pause. So what the dialogue suggests that he is positioned in a chair at this point. That there is an adjustment at least of the positioning. Anyway, the dead body has to remain effectively as a terrifying war fixture who's being made to look like he's still alive. Can we convey that? What can we do here? Helen, then Lois.
I think that we don't want to bring the chair on at the beginning. I think that enter Abdelmalec in his chair. I think Abdelmalec staggers on, supported by Zareo. And the chair is a later addition to the scene.
Agreement or disagreement? Lois?
Well, I'm puzzled by this line about think he doth repose him in his tent. How could they think that unless he was in a tent? I mean, does that mean that they're actually going to carry him into his tent and put him in a chair there? Or is there a tent on the stage? I mean, I think Abdelmalec is ill, isn't he, rather than wounded, if I remember rightly.
Yes, isn't it? He's just very, very poorly. Though of course it might be both. Of course.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that precise detail matters too much. We could fudge that issue slightly.
Yeah.
And can we convey? Do we now take a moment to try and figure out a way of propping the body up in a chair, and can we do that? Or should we even attempt it?
Where's
Alexandra?
this tent?
Do we need to see it? Do we need to see the doing of it? Or can we just see him having been propped and set up, etc. later on? So, because he says, Muly Mahamet says, go take him and do that, right? So if the next time we see him, it's just a still image of a person in a chair, set up the way it should be, and it never kind of moves, then we get the idea that they've done the thing they said they did. Without us having to worry about the actual doing of that, and whether or not the chair gets brought on as a feature and all of this.
Well, the complication comes really with the next stage direction. So we have Alarums enter to the battle, and the Christians. The Duke of Zareo is slain. The implication, it seems to me, there is that the body of this chap in a chair is being presented to the oncoming army, and everybody is terrified, and they fly off, and battle ensues around and that this is a set piece thing. I don't know if I'm over elaborating on that. Helen?
I think the tent is going to be the inner area, which has presumably some sort of curtains supplying the tent flap.
Mm-hmm.
So this can be...
and then the body is then taken out and into the main body of the stage.
In the chair.
Yeah. And carried by 4 stout people, while everybody else desperately tries to run around to be somebody else.
It's me you're carrying. It'll need to be more than 4.
If you've ever tried to lift dead weights on stage for any great height, it can be it can be a challenge. For all shapes and sizes, it must be said, because the chair's got to be taken into account as well. Anyway, I've seen Dan, I've seen Alex, I've seen Eric, I've seen Alan. I'll go to Dan first.
I'm not sure if this is feasible for a second reading, but I wondered if this might be a place where we can start to think about playing with the backgrounds. For example, if somebody's in, I'm assuming, as well as Helen, it's in the tiring space where the curtain would be drawn there, that we can just have one of those classic curtain stage things or whatever that goes up in the background for that person. But also, one, if somebody dies, rather than having somebody just sitting there, or I don't know what, or some sort of bad indication, maybe just something always indicating that somebody's dead, a skull picture for it. And then that will look, I wouldn't necessarily say, maybe a little more classy than something else. At least, I mean, we know it's iconic. It's a symbol. We know what that means.
Yeah, I do. I like the idea that what we're calling Act 5, Scene 2 is essentially in a tent. That when Muly Mahamet Seth rushes, he's rushing into a tent to see what the state of his brother, and takes him a moment to see that he's dead, and then they take him out into the battlefield, into what we will probably in a moment call Act 5, Scene 3, which is effectively just a stage direction scene. That's currently in my mind. Sorry, there were lots of people whose hands went up. I'm deflecting. Eric, then Alexandra.
Yeah, I was gonna say that just sounds more like they're actually leaving the stage with the body, and then they go to the battle separately. That they don't actually take the body with them. But I don't know if that's because I've not read the rest of the play in order, because it just sounds kind of weird. I mean, I know that it's customary to sort of use the leader as inspiration, like sort of boosting morale, but it sounds kind of weird to do it with the chair. Unless chair here means chariot, in which case it sounds kind of weird.
I think it's basically whatever they have to hand to present him to the troops for morale purposes. I think that's the general idea of what the point of this is. He's not dead, people. We still can win this fight. That's what's going on there. Alexandra, then Alan, then Helen.
If we think of it as there's a battle going on somewhere, and the leader, who is not a person who can fight, is set up in a place where he is visible with coverage, so tent, then what we've got is theoretically we've got a scene of looking at the battlefield, and then a scene of looking at this kind of remote area, and he's watching it. He sees that his people are losing. He dies. Muly Mahamet comes along and says, "Oh, I know. Let's prop him up and pretend he's still alive. You guys go do that." End of the scene. We then have a new scene on the battlefield, the Christians and the Duke of Aveiro and so on and so forth. So I wanted to propose a scene division here. And in terms of how much we see, we don't need, I think as long as we establish it, again, on stage, you would want to establish who is where and what is going on and what the relative geography is. On Zoom, I don't know that we need to do that as much, as long as we're clearly going flick from we're here to flick somewhere else, etc. And if the bit that is on the battlefield is always just blank screens and sound effects, then we get the idea that we've moved to a new space, and then we move to another new space, which is wherever the Duke of Aveiro is getting killed.
I absolutely agree on that is effectively where we've reached is the end of a scene. I think we should divide this into a separate unit of action following. Everybody leaves the stage, and then there is an additional battle thing going on. How we present that and how much of that we present is a moment we'll get to in a second. Alan, then Helen.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, in fact, at the end of that sequence at the Thy Soul with Joy, Exeunt Omnes, Manet, Muly Mahamet in his chair in the tiring space. Does that make some sense?
It does. I don't want to add too much potential elaboration to it. I want to keep it relatively simple. So all that matters for our purposes is that he dies and somebody else enters to him, and that we ignore the skirmish. At the end of this, everybody just exits, and that's all the data we currently need. I think, if that makes sense, if I've understood what you were saying. Because I don't want us to start creating world building to an extent, overextent in terms of the text that we're working towards now. Helen,
my point's been made.
Excellent.
Thank you.
I love it when people just nip in and out. Eric.
I was just going to say that maybe, like, sort of for the battle scenes, you could just have, like, because obviously the battle's going on in the background, as we've said. You can just have someone fading down the audio, but I don't know if that really works on Zoom. So yeah, that might be issue.
Yeah, it might be something if we had a post-production element to what we do, where we could actually just quietly add some sound effects before we release the video. But at the moment, that isn't an issue, and it's certainly not something we can actually do live, because the way sound tends to work as it stands. I'm going to push us forward. So we'll say at the end of the exuent with Muly, Mahamet, Seth, that is effectively the end of a scene. We're going to call the alarums enter to the battle, Christians and the Duke of Avero slain, Act 5, Scene 3 at the moment. I'm going to call that. The question here is, do we call that a single scene in its own right, followed by another scene with Sebastian and Stukeley? Or do we just elide those together? I'm seeing lots of nods for them, us going to Act 5, Scene 4. Is that where we're going?
5-3.
Yeah, so alarums enter the battle of the Christians and the Duke of Avero slain. That's Act 5, Scene 3.
Right.
The enter Sebastian Stukeley, that's Act 5, Scene 4. So let's briefly, while Alan is making that change, talk about that battle. How much of that battle would we demonstrate? Do we need to see that in the Zoom production, because they're about to talk about the death of the Duke of Avero? Would we just put a line through that for the read through? I saw Elizabeth and then Alexandra.
Yeah, I think we've done some really lovely battles in the second look sessions on the Fridays. I remember one particularly that I loved where Helen had her head in a bag. So I think this is a really good opportunity for us to explore some of the battles, to explore some of the battle scenes. I know one that we did, we had lots of different kitchen utensils to hand. That was quite funny. But I do think that we should explore the battles on screen, because they are quite compelling.
Yes, so a vote for doing this particular fight battle sequence. Alexandra.
I don't know whether actually you need to separate them as scenes, because if we see the Duke of Avero be slain and then we see these people come on and go, oh look, the brave and mighty Prince, the Duke of Avero, slain in my sight. Sounds a lot like they were there when that was happening, or sort of within distance. So I think that I revised my statement. I think you might not need to separate these two as scenes. In terms of for Zoom, I very much think we can get away without it. You've had a corpse on stage, you just appear another corpse and people see the corpse, or you don't even have the Duke of Avero's vignette open.
It's a question of how important is it for us to see the Duke of Avero, who we have met, is not a completely random stranger, and does it give us an opportunity for an exciting? It could be a one-to-one combat situation. I don't know yet. I can't remember who kills him. So it might be quite nice to see that as a moment and something that we spend a couple of minutes just making sure we make work. Elizabeth was talking about, sometimes these scenes can work really quite dynamically and interestingly. Do we take a moment to say, okay, this is actually a cuttable moment, but is this actually worth at least vaguely showing, even if it's a separate scene where the Duke is killed, and then we go to a separate scene with King Sebastian immediately after, so that we can break it up in the way we flow things. Lots of hands going up. Dan, Helen, Lois.
Just a quick question of, when we talk about breaking it up into another scene, is that just more for our organizational purposes, or is that okay?
Yeah,
because if it is just for that, then I think it really doesn't, in terms of just how we want to rehearse it or organize it for reading, then I think it is important to have it as something separate, a separate item, because it is important, obviously, to show that this Duke is being slain. But also, I think this is where we can refer to the stage directions and have something, a bit of a trope every single time that we're having some sort of battle or war, really do have an alarm or a trumpet, I don't know what, something to indicate every single time, since we're not going to be playing with lighting anyway, not likely going to be playing with lighting in that sense. So we know that, okay, we heard the horn or whatever, the trumpet or whatever it is, and then some sort of rabble noise. And then now we know there's a battle, slain, boom, that'll be done in less than 15 seconds, I think.
I mean, it might be a case in this case, we have the alarm. So if we say we've got trumpets from earlier, that's an SFX cue. And then we just, rather than focusing on the complete battle, we take that sound cue to effectively mean there is a battle going on. And we just watch the Duke being killed. And then we move on. And that is enough to convey that information sufficiently. That might be a route to go with. Maybe make a note on that, Alan, for that alarm to be a definite sound cue.
Yeah, I've
Helen.
already put that down as an SFX.
Excellent.
Yeah.
But you're saying dumb show of the death of Alvaro.
I think it's definitely an option. We may change our mind closer to the time, but I think that it's not out of play. Helen, then Lois.
Yeah, I think Elizabeth has a point. This is a battle we got to do some fighting. I also think that we may be making a mistake in going through this scene by scene, saying, well, we can drop it here, we must put a bit in there, let's have a sound cue. But in fact, what we need is an overview of the entire battle so we can decide which is the important point where we show some real fighting.
Well, once we're at the end of this session, then we can zero in on that. We're nearly at the end of the main action anyway.
Right,
fair
enough. But what I mean is that taking it scene by scene, we may be doing damage to the overall picture of the battle itself, because there will come a moment where where the battle tips, and we've got to have some fighting.
And yes, so that's adjustment we need to make as we go along. But it's
and
also
we may have passed it.
We may have done, but we can always go back. None of these decisions are concrete. We're sort of making potential notes as we go. But it's a good point, and that's partly what the point of a second run would be about, is to actually get a sense of how this flows as a series of actions. But we kind of sort of need to decide how we're going to make it flow to see that, if that makes sense. We're in a chicken and egg situation here, people. A chicken and egg. Lois.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking it already in terms of the stage direction that follows this one, because if we're going to have the Duke of Aveiro slain, he's clearly got to put up a heroic fight, because the Sebastian's speech says, like a lion did he bear himself, and unless we're subverting the thing, that he's got to do that. But then the next stage direction says that two set upon Stukeley, and he driveth them in. So we've got another heroic fight, one man beating off two. I mean, it's just a question of how much of this we want to keep, with not very much of a break between it. In a way, it's the same point Helen was making. It's the overall picture, the flow of this battle.
I mean, what I want to do at the moment is to break it down into units, and then we can decide which units we're keeping at the end. Perhaps that's the best way of explaining that, because until we know what the component parts are, because the script doesn't identify them very clearly, we can't decide what we want to focus on, because at the moment the stage directions are not wholly clear a lot of the time. Eric.
I was going to say that, like, it's interesting to think about the way people downstream, because, for example, I remember Liza had done this during the Daemon and Infant DS one, where I think it was, I can't remember his name now. Anyway, got murdered, and her character got murdered, and basically she had to, like, sort of fake die on screen and just lay there for the rest of the scene, which was quite effective, because obviously that they get murdered, but then it's a reminder that they're there and dead. So I guess, like, some people who are named perhaps have to die, I don't know, on screen, or sort of. Well, I don't know how long they would have to remain.
Well, that's the question. Is that actually it might be that Act 5, Scene 3, the battle sequence, actually the only stage direction we deal with in that scene is Alaram's enter the battle and the Christians. That's a battle scene, and then actually the death of the Duke of Aveiro is the beginning of the next scene with King Sebastian, and that his body remains on stage throughout. That might be another way to break this up, just to make life even more confusing. The action can be broken up in terms of administrative units in different ways. That doesn't necessarily mean that's how it will be viewed by the audience. That's the problem with sequences like this, which essentially overlap, but we need to find a way of of as a group, noting it and making sense of that action, so that we can action it, basically, if that makes sense. I want to move a little further forward so that we get a bit of a bit more of an overview of where these overlapping scenes are going. And Lois has already mentioned upcoming exciting adventures. So I'm just going to ask Elizabeth, could you read King Sebastian, please? So enter Sebastian and Stukeley. And I've asked Dan, if you can be Stukeley. You say so much during this scene; it's very exciting for you. But just give it your all. Anyway, we've just seen the Duke die. King Sebastian speaks.
Seest thou not, Stukeley? Oh, Stukeley, seest thou not the great dishonour done to Christendom? Our cheerful onset crossed in springing hope, the brave and mighty Prince, Duke of Avera, slain in my sight. Now joy betide his ghost, for like a lion did he bear himself. Our battles are all now disordered, and by our horses, strange retiring back, our middle wing of footmen overrode. Stukeley, alas, I see my oversight. False-hearted Mahamet, now to my cost. I see thy treachery, warned to beware a fate so full of fraud and villainy.
And here we get to the stage directions. There are more alarms, so we can say that's a legitimate sound effect. And they run out, or do they? Do they run out? Because it goes. Then there's two set upon Stukeley, and he driveth them in. So they're running out, doing a rear guard fighting action. Is that how it works, or are they running out? Because how do we unpack this stage direction for this exit effectively? Is this an exciting fight scene, or what? Various opinions. I'll go to Lois, then Alexandra.
I think they run out of the tiring house, don't they? I mean, they run onto the stage. I think that's what out means, and in means into the tiring house or off the stage. It's a reverse of what we would say.
Yes, but the question is, who's
yes.
running out? Is that the enemy running out of the tiring house set upon Stukeley, and he driveth them in?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's the entering. Attackers.
Yeah.
So
So
I
what we
thought it
would,
was
what
King
we.
Sebastian. Sorry, Alexandra.
No, you go ahead.
King Sebastian and Stukeley that run out.
So we think it's perhaps the other way around. That it's their opponents run out, and then they will fight them off stage. Is that how we? I mean, we can basically make a decision here. I mean, on the ambiguity. Alexandra was next. Then we'll go back to Lois.
So I was reading in the previous stage directions. I was reading "enter to the battle" as enter. As that is people coming on stage, basically. Enter to, and so the run out. I'm reading that as also running on. So if the they means the opponents, there's an alarm within. They, the people we've mentioned before, the Christians or the opponents, come run out onto the stage, of whom two set up on Stukeley and he driveth them in. Then he could technically be exiting attacking wise rather than retreating.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Lois, we wanting to say more on that?
Yeah, because I think possibly during all of this, we're seeing Mahamet's treachery. I mean, there's something in this text that is clearly implying action, though I'm not quite sure what it is. But our battles are now all disordered, and by our horses' strange retiring back, our middle wing of footmen overrode. And then he says, false-hearted Mahamet, now to my cost, I see thy treachery. I mean, I think this is Muly Mahamet, isn't it? Doing something nasty. And all I can think of is he's somehow got their horses to retreat. Something weird has gone on, which presumably we ought to be showing in some way or other, which seems to me can only be shadow puppets or something. We can't very well have a cast of thousands, but it's it's extremely confusing. But I think there must be something like that they were winning, and now something has gone wrong, and it's probably because of his treachery.
So we've swapped effectively to the other camp. So if we follow the earlier stage direction that we're calling in scene 3, enter to the battle, that's, you know, presumably the dead body with their armies going to battle, and the Christians are driven back, and that's when King Sebastian comes on stage and says, "We are losing, we are losing, we are losing." So there is a certain flowing logic to that action, if that's how we conceive it. Helen.
Yeah, Mahamet is on Sebastian's side, as I remember it, or is supposed to be.
Yeah.
But, I mean, his treachery may merely consist in not having achieved what he set out to achieve, leaving their wing undefended or something. But what I think the problem is that there is no exit for King Sebastian, but he's got to go.
Well, they presumably he exits with Stukeley at that moment. That seems implied, if not stated.
So two are set upon Stukeley, but Sebastian is also fighting someone else.
Well, he's not necessarily fighting someone. Sebastian probably doesn't do any fighting. I don't get the impression Sebastian's a fighter. He leaves that to Stukeley as the man of action to fight for him. And he's, just going, "Oh, everybody else failed me. It's all them other people." I don't know if I'm exaggerating an actual character point or if I'm just inventing one. But yeah, there needs to be a note actually there for Alan that Sebastian has to exit during that sequence.
For one reason or another.
Well, he's with Stukeley, so Stukeley's doing the fighting, driving those people off, and he exits with him.
So I mean, effectively, if we put that stage direction as being alarms SFX,
enter soldiers,
exit Sebastian.
No, I don't think so. I think Sebastian would exit with Stukeley. I think their opponents enter, set upon Stukeley. Stukeley's doing all the man of action fighty stuff.
He drives it.
And then they exit together as they drive those soldiers off, unless people disagree entirely on that point. Lots of hands. Dan first, then Lois, then Helen.
Well, the next time that we see Sebastian is when he's dead, when he's brought on stage. So I don't know if I want to necessarily have Stukeley and Sebastian going off together, because that would imply that they were together the rest of the time. So why is Sebastian dead and not Stukeley?
I think it makes more sense if you get the alarms in the background. Sebastian does a runner, and then the other two set on Stukeley.
Okay, I could go with that.
That's exactly what I'm getting at there.
Yeah.
I don't think. Sorry, can I?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, Sebastian is one of the heroes of this.
Yes.
Certainly from the Christian point of view,
but
his losses, but he dies, a great loss to Christendom. But I think it's perfectly possible that he and the enemy their enemy come in, two set upon Stukeley, and there's a demonstration fight. He driveth them in. Sebastian can also fight someone and chase them off.
I agree with you there. It's just I wouldn't want to see them as if they were going off as a team, because then Stukeley is going to then reappear later on, and then it just starts to beg the question of what happened there.
Yeah.
Well,
so I would think
that question is slightly moot, because it doesn't matter whether they exited together. Something happens when they're both off stage. It can happen. They could split at any point. I think also there's a question for Zoom whether we would be able to communicate any of that anyway. How much of this we would get across in terms of who exits where is a slightly irrelevant concept. They're just going to They're just going to disappear. Lots of hands again. I think Lois, I need to go back to you, but then Dan, then Alexandra.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, they run out means the Moors come rushing out, as much of the army as we can get. And then I think, given that the death of Sebastian is a really important historical point in this whole thing, because it affects what happens to Portugal after this. But I think there should be something really ominous. I mean, lots of Moors surrounding him. He fights, goes off, followed by a lot of them. There should be some sense that this is going to be something awful. I mean, that he'll probably be surrounded and killed. Nobody really knows. I mean, people were turning up for years saying they were Sebastian and that they'd survived this battle. So it could be that it's meant to seem mysterious, but it does need to be, I think, a fairly dramatic exit, given that we're not going to see what happens to him.
I think there's an element that we might be, I mean, the problem is we don't know, but we might be, you know, if I was doing this on stage, I might take this as a moment to stage a dramatic death scene for Sebastian, because it might be effective. I don't think at this forum, at what we're doing here, at the moment, all that matters is that Sebastian at some point disappears at the end of this scene. I don't think we can convey possible options of that, or that's something we should necessarily be doing. But you can disagree. Feel free to disagree. It's allowed. Dan, then Alexandra, then Eric. You're muted at the moment.
Just for the purposes of Zoom, I wondered if this is then, I mean, probably everyone thought this already anyway, but whoever's going to be playing what role, just make sure you're all wearing the same color for that. And then also that for this particular scene, I think the only thing that really needs to be conveyed is Sebastian goes off at some point, two come in on Stukeley, and then the three of them go off.
So
and then more comes in.
So if we say for the purposes of doing this, that the exit of Sebastian, as Alan and various people have said, is the first thing that happens before the entrance of the other people.
Yeah.
So if Alan, you can make a note of the exit Sebastian, the moment you hear the alarms, Sebastian exits.
Yeah, that's what I tentatively typed.
Yeah, and then enters some soldiers, fighty scene with Stukeley, and they exit fightiness. That's lovely. Alexandra, then Eric.
I wanted to make a point that has already been resolved, which is that you cannot on Zoom show where people are going, but you can show when. And so you can differentiate between them in that way. I also think that it is so because of the medium that we have, you could show something like, you know, lots and lots and lots of faces appearing, which means they are overwhelmed. They are fighting against overwhelming odds, and it's enough to understand that and then cut, rather than to need to see exactly what happens or how that goes on. You know, so there are things that we can do on here that don't actually involve fighting, but still give the sense of the battle.
Eric.
I was just gonna say that, yeah, on Zoom it's, well, as we know, battles are hard, but then like sort of if you time it wrongly, then you don't know if the two are attacking both Sebastian and Stukeley, or sort of just Stukeley, because then either Sebastian exits before Stukeley starts fighting, or afterwards, because then it just kind of, it's like 2 against 2, so it's like not really particularly interesting. Or, you know, sort of like, how do you show that on screen? Do you just kind of go, oh, King Sebastian, I will attack you, and sort of that kind, you know what I mean? You might have to add more to sort of,
yeah, I think that's why I mean, it's a decision that we're making here, but that Sebastian goes first, and then we just make that it's not a separate scene, but it's effectively a separate unit of action. King Sebastian finishes his speech, face so full of fraud and villainy, and off, and then overwhelming odds attack, or 2 odds attack Stukeley, and then we make a decision as to whether that's a fight scene or not, and we move on, and I am going to move on. We're going to move on to what must be another scene now. So we'll 5-5. Enter the Moor and his boy flying. So that's Muly, Mahamet, and a boy. So I'll ask. Who haven't I asked to do things? I will ask Lois, actually, if you could be Muly, Mahamet, and Emma, could you be the boy, please?
Helen, a horse!
Oh, my lord, if you return, you die.
Villain, I say, give me a horse to fly, to swim the river, villain, and to fly. Where shall I find some unfrequented place, some uncouth walk where I may curse my fill, my stars, my dam, my planets, and my nurse, the fire, the air, the water, and the earth, all causes that have thus conspired in one to nourish and preserve me to this shame? Thou that wert at my birth predominate, thou fatal star, what planet e'er thou be, spit out thy poison bad, and all the ill that fortune, fate, or heaven may bode a man. Thou nurse unfortunate, guilty of all, thou mother of my life that brought'st me forth, cursed mayst thou be for such a cursed son. Cursed be thy son with every curse thou hast. Ye elements, of whom consists this clay, this mass of flesh, this cursed, crazed corpse, destroy, dissolve, disturb, and dissipate what water, earth, and air congealed.
Oh, my lord, these ruthless Moors pursue you at the heels, and come amain to put you to the sword.
Horse, horse, villain, a horse, that I may take the river straight and fly.
Here is a horse, my lord, as swiftly paced as Pegasus. Mount thee thereon, and save thyself by flight.
Mount me I will, but may I never pass the river till I be revenged upon thy soul, accursed Abdelmalec. If not on earth, yet when we meet in hell, before grim Minos, Radamanth, and Iacchus, the combat will I crave upon thy ghost, and drag thee through the loathsome pools of Lethe, Styx, and fiery Phlegethon.
And they exit, and that's again the end effectively of a scene. Nothing really leaping out at me as being stage terms complicated or fiddly there.
Except the horse.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Here is a horse, just gesture. It's fine. We don't need to bring a horse on. I know you want a horse. We all love a horse, but we don't need a horse. You know, the scene flows perfectly well. It conveys the basic energy of stuff. And there's some debate in chat about the identity of the boy. That's a production decision which we'll defer to another time. We go into then what must be another scene with some action. We are running out of action, actually. We are now very much at the tail enders. So this is what, 5, 6?
Yep.
So again, we've got effectively a sound cue, alarms. We could almost say every scene opens with an alarm sound effect just to break them up, regardless of whether they actually mean a battle or not. And we have Stukeley with 2 Italians. We've already got a Stukeley. Dan is already set up. Eric, if I could ask you to read Hercules, and Rachael, if I could ask you to read Jonas, please. And we'll see what exciting issues we have with the soon to occur death of Stukeley. Spoilers, sorry.
Stand, traitor, stand, ambitious Englishman, proud Stukeley, stand and stir not ere thou die. Thy forwardness to follow wrongful arms, and leave our famous expedition, erst intended by his holiness for Ireland, foully hath here betrayed and tied us all to ruthless fury of our heathen foe, for which, as we are sure to die, that thou shalt pay satisfaction with thy blood.
Avaunt, base villains, twit ye me with shame or infamy of this injurious war, when he that is the judge of right and wrong determines battle as him pleaseth best? But sith my stars bode me this tragic end, that I must perish by these barbarous Moors, whose weapons have made passage for my soul that breaks from out the prison of my breast. Ye proud malicious dogs of Italy, strike on! Strike down this body to the earth, whose mounting mind stoops to no feeble stroke.
Stabbiness occurs, yes. So that's something where we can rehearse a stab. We have talked about stabbiness before. We may talk about that at the end of the scene, but Stukeley isn't dead yet. So let's let the dialogue continue with Jonas and Stukeley at some. We can debate where Stukeley is stabbed, because clearly it's not a major internal organ or artery. So, stabbingness has occurred. Jonas speaks. Or second Italian, depending on your point of view.
Why suffer we this English man to live? Villain, bleed on, thy blood in channels run, and meet with those whom thou to death hast done.
Thus Stukeley, slain with many a deadly stab, dies in these desert fields of Africa. Hark, friends, and with the story of my life, let me beguile the torment of my death. In England's London lordings was I born, on that brave bridge, the bar that thwarts the Thames. My golden days, my younger careless years, were when I touched the height of fortune's wheel and lived in affluence of wealth and ease. Thus, in my country carried long aloft, a discontented humor drave me thence to cross the seas to Ireland, then to Spain. There had I welcome and right royal pay of Philip, whom some call the Catholic king. There did Tom Stukeley glitter all in gold, mounted upon his jennet white as snow, shining as Phoebus in King Philip's court. There like a lord, famous Don Stukeley lived, for so they called me in the court of Spain, till for a blow I gave a bishop's man, a strife gan rise between his lord and me, for which we both were banished by the king. From thence to Rome rides Stukeley all aflaunt, received with royal welcomes of the Pope. There was I graced by Gregory the Great, that then created me Marquis of Ireland. Short be my tale, because my life is short. The coast of Italy and Rome I left. Then was I made Lieutenant General of those small forces that for Ireland went, and with my companies embarked at Ostia. My sails I spread, and with these men of war, in fatal hour at Lisbon we arrived. From thence to this hard exigent, was Stukeley driven to fight or else to die, dated to the field that never could endure to hear God mars his drum, but he must march. Sweet Sebastian, hadst thou been well advised, thou mightest have managed arms successfully, but from our cradles we were marked all, and destined to die in Afric here. Stukeley, the story of thy life is told. Here, breathe thy last, and bid thy friends farewell. And if thy country's kindness be so much, then let thy country kindly ring thy knell. Now, go in and in that bed of honor die, where brave Sebastian's breathless corpse doth lie. Here endeth fortune's rule and bitter rage. Here end Tom Stukeley's earthly pilgrimage.
And at great length he dies. And boy, yeah, I mean, you really want the music in the background, big, sad. It's it's a moment. He dieth, and I don't think I'm fairly certain that he just remains there, and everybody enters unto him, and various other corpses are brought on as well, so that we end up with something of a corpsey stage. So that this isn't the end of the scene. This is this. I think I'm right on that. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's been a while, but all the bodies here are laid. We do have a problem in a sense with. We have a lot of bodies being brought on, and whether we want to bring on the bodies, Zoom thing coming up, or we just mention them and leave them not on. It's a question. Dan.
This is where I was wondering, where I was thinking of having the skull icon on there, so we're not all just sitting there looking like extras on a stage. Other thoughts about the presentation? To a degree, we might deal with this in a moment. It's interesting, this question of Stukeley's death. It almost feels like during the scene. I don't want to add too much onto it, but that his murderers might be poking him full of holes variously during the scene, rather than just they stab him at the end. It does feel like that sort of slightly tormentiness that goes with it at the top. They're not happy bunnies. We obviously need to look at rehearsing a basic stabbingness, but stabbingness
it's generally to do with just make sure you see the blade in advance and make sure we decide precisely where it's going to be striking, and it doesn't have to be too well rehearsed to be effective. Any additional thoughts before we conclude this play? Eric?
I was just gonna say that it's interesting to figure out where he's stabbed, like physically, because like that would have to be a very like, I don't know, like the femur, for example, where it would bleed very, very slowly and he would die very, very slowly, giving him enough time to say that whole speech. But I don't know if it's sort of like this huge, like, you know, obviously this is me applying logic, which is very, very bad for plays.
If this was a Western, it would be a gut shot. Someone would shoot him in the stomach and he'd be writhing there for ages, and that's how it would go. Lois?
Yeah, I was just going to say, this is obviously the speech that's being parodied in The Night of the Burning Pestle, when Rafe has this long death speech. They tell him, come out and to die. And then he tells the story of his life and ends up with, fly, fly, my soul, to Grocer's Hall.
Yeah, it's a bit much, but then as someone put in the Alexandra put in the chat, you know, this is one of the primary reasons people came to see the play, is to see this famous figure and his famous death scenes, and you can imagine what the leading actors of the day would do with this. I'm sure it's very stirring, but for us who've no idea who the hell he is, it's perhaps a bit odd, as it were. Additional thoughts, maybe about the stabbing or about other things before we move on to the rest of the scene. Alexandra, currently.
Again, filmically, I think an audience would understand, let me put this into proper words. I think an audience of that time would have understood things in the same way as we understand things in films, where, for instance, time sort of dilates suddenly. So, you know, this is all stuff that he is thinking while he's falling to the ground and then he's dead. As opposed to it being a very long kind of, we are watching him die by bleeding out or something like that. So I don't know what, but it might be useful or necessary to do something on Zoom that kind of indicates the fact that he is not sort of, those other people are not kind of just standing in the background being like, well, I tried to kill you, why are you not dead? I mean, he's still speaking.
Well, he is alone at that point. You know, his murderers have exited.
So, I didn't notice that, sorry.
I mean, there's the thing is, it's the difference between over here writhing, look at me with my terrible hole in me, telling my life story, whereas it does feel like actually that it should come forward. And it becomes almost this a slightly, and not worrying too much about the whole death acting stuff, but just do the speech, and you know, add some death acting stuff at the very end. You know, you've got 4 lines towards the end. Dan, you were reading it, so you may have other thoughts.
Yeah, I was wondering. I'm a big fan of whenever people are doing asides or monologues, to do the approach to the camera there. I mean, when necessary there, and I think this might be a play where we can, when there is a second look, to just instruct everyone who's got some sort of speech to do one of your things directly to it.
We do have a bit of a problem with you know, where we're looking for a side sometimes, because if we are doing a convention where we're always looking at the person we're talking to, and then where do we send our asides, and you know, and it has to sort of become a very thing kind of effect. So it is something we haven't actually really looked at and dealt with and create a proper set of guidelines that perhaps we should do. Maybe we need a cheat sheet that we actually send out for people. Emma?
Yeah, no, I agree with all that. I just wanted to say that there's a point about halfway through that speech where the pace and the urgency could suddenly shift, because he says, short be my tale because my life is short. It's a sudden, he's feeling, oh, actually, I haven't got long left. And then the next section of the speech kind of a slightly different pace, just to kind of create a change somewhere in the long piece. But I completely agree with all the kind of closer to camera, and that's good.
And it's always dangerous when we have a long speech where it says, I will be brief. That we've always got to work against that very slight slither of pathos, trying to drive a wedge between us and pathos. Let us read on to the end of the play. There are various stage directions, and I think various things we can discuss as we go. So returning to various roles, we've got Muly, Mahamet, Seth, which is Alexandra, Alan returning as Zareo. If I can ask, Rachael, you haven't said very much. You can be the Portugal turning up. And who fancies? Helen, you can be a peasant, can't you? You can be a peasant.
Sure. Am I not still someone's dead body being carted round in a chair?
Well, that's the point. We should probably keep you as a consistent dead body, shouldn't we? I'll ask Emma then if you can be the peasant. And we'll see if we need Helen's corpse. We'll find out in a moment. All these potential corpses coming in, because we know Elizabeth will be returning as a corpse in a moment. So many corpses. If you're dead, maybe we should have a convention of something like that. Anyway, we're going to assume that Stukeley is still on stage but dead, and then we have a stage direction with drums and trumpets. We can say that that's a potential sound cue. It may not be necessary, but we'll say that for the moment with the entrance of Muly, Mahamet, Seth.
Retreat is sounded through our camp, and now from battle's fury cease our conquering Moors. Pay thanks to heaven with sacrificing fire, Alcazar and ye towns of Barbary. Now hast thou sat as in a trance, and seen to thy soul's joy and honour of thy house the trophies and the triumphs of thy men, great Abdelmalec, and the god of kings.
So just pause there. So Abdelmalec has definitely come on with you, or has always been on stage. This is to be debated. I think it should be brought on in triumph with you. I think Helen does definitely need to be, and that's the point when you actually talk. Now hast thou sat as in a trance. That's when you're talking to. How we can convey that again is a question. Maybe that's the point in Zoom the body should appear rather than with you. So actually a couple of lines in after Barbary, the corpse appears. Video feed is uncovered, and Helen does her wonderful corpse acting. There we are. Or we do some kind of signifier instead, depending on which is more, again, that sliver of bathos and pathos. Anyway, sorry, I paused you there mid-speech. Continue talking to great Abdelmalec, please.
Great Abdelmalec, and the God of kings hath made thy war successful by thy right, his friends whom death and fates had ta'en from thee. Lo, this was he that was the people's pride and cheerful sunshine to his subjects all. Now have him hence, that royally he may be buried and embalmed as is meet. Zareo, have you thought through the camp proclaimed as erst we gave in charge?
We have, my lord, and rich rewards proposed for them that find the body of the king. For by those guards that hath him in their charge, we understand that he was done to death. And for his search, 2 prisoners, Portugals, are set at large to find their royal king.
But of the traitorous Moor you hear no news, that fled the field and sought to swim the ford?
Not yet, my lord, but doubtless God will tell, and with his finger point out where he haunts.
So let it rest, and on this earth bestow this princely course, till further for his funerals we provide.
From him to thee, as true succeeding prince, with all allegiance and with honours types, in name of all thy people and thy land, we give thee this kingly crown and diadem.
We thank you all, and as my lawful right, with God's defence and yours, shall I it keep.
And we'll just pause briefly there. So that might be a moment when we get rid of the corpse of Abdelmalec in our production. We've got the question: the corpse needs to re-enter with or slightly after Muly, Mahamet, Seth, and I suspect it will be a good idea. This seems like a good cue to say, on this earth bestow this princely corpse. In practice, they're just probably putting him down. but in effect for Zoom, I think we just get rid of the body, because I think there are enough bodies on stage coming on in a moment, and that's probably good. Just a general note there, Alan, as a potential thing that we would actually put in the script.
Already typed.
Lovely. I say it because I don't need to. That's the system that I like. Lovely. So we have the entrance of two Portugals, two soldiers. We've only got one who's going to actually say any dialogue, and that's fine as it stands. So we have the body of King Sebastian, so we have to again decide how we're bringing on the dead body of Lovely. For the moment, that might not be what we do, but for the moment that'll be do. So Portugal, please.
As gave your grace and charge, right royal prince, the fields and sandy plains we have surveyed, and even among the thickest of his lords, the noble king of Portugal we found, wrapped in his colors coldly on the earth, and done to death with many a mortal wound.
Lo, here, my lords, this is the earth and day of him that erst was mighty king of Portugal. There let him lie. And you for this be free to make return from hence to Christendom.
And again, I kind of feel that that's a moment when they put down the body, and the body can switch off their video feed, and so that, or in this case, Elizabeth can relax. I think that's a visual grammar that we can work with, keeping the screen from getting too cluttered. I don't know if people disagree with me on this point. We're allowed to. Rachael.
Yeah, I feel for the soldiers, it's a quick enter that bit of dialogue and then an exit with the body.
I think for the live stage picture, it's a matter of more and more people come on stage, and that there's a sort of order, and maybe everybody processes off in order at the end, and it's a grand way of closing the play. But for here, I think we should go with one body's brought on, got rid of, another body's brought on, got rid of. I may change my mind about what happens with Stukeley in a moment, but we'll see what the rest of the dialogue says about him. Eric.
I was just going to say that maybe you could just if this was a live stage production, you could kind of cheat it by having someone lie under like a sort of the colors of Portugal rather than, something lying under the colors of Portugal rather than having someone being carried on and off.
There's nothing worse than an actor breathing through their corpse. There's nothing that stomach up and down thing. Yeah, just a dummy prop with a flag draped over it would probably be a lot better, wouldn't it?
And lighter.
Yeah, but they have to act though it's heavy. Okay, let's just.
Yeah, I think some sort of cart with wheels. With the body on a stretcher on it.
We're asking for more and more. With the stage version of this is just getting bigger and more expensive with every minute. The touring truck for this wouldn't be small. Okay. It would be a shame to do this play with anything less than a ridiculously large budget. If you're doing something with spectacle, do it properly. Okay, so we've said we've got rid of those bodies. We now have stage direction. Enter two peasants. Again, I don't know if we need two peasants for Zoom in the same way I don't think we need two Portugals. Again, that suggests that they're either end of a stretcher, doesn't it? Set up, but for our purposes, just one peasant with the body of Muly Mahamet, who we saw earlier, who might be doubling as somebody else. I don't know. I forget. Oh, it's Lois, isn't it? Has died.
Yep.
That was sad. So anyway, sorry, peasant and everybody else.
Long live the mighty king of Barbary.
Welcome, my friend. What body hast thou there?
The body of the ambitious enemy that squandered all this blood in Africa, whose malice sent so many souls to hell. The traitor, Muly Mahamet, do I bring, and for thy slave, I throw him at thy feet.
Zareo, give this man a rich reward, and thanked be the God of just revenge that he hath given our foe into our hands, beastly, unarmed, slavish, full of shame. But say, how came this traitor to his end?
Seeking to save his life by shameful flight, he mounteth on a hot barbarian horse, and so in purpose to have passed the stream, his headstrong steed throws him from out his seat, where, diving oft for lack of skill to swim, it was my chance alone to see him drowned, whom by the heels I dragged from out the pool, and hither have brought him thus filled with mud.
A death too good for such a damned wretch. But sith our rage and rigour of revenge by violence of his end prevented is, that all the world may learn by him to void, to hail on princes, to injurious war, his skin we will be parted from his flesh, and being stiffened out and stuffed with straw, so to deter and fear the lookers on from any such foul fact or bad attempt, away with him. And now, my lords, for this Christian king, my lord Zareo, let it be your charge to see the soldiers tread a solemn march, trailing their pikes and ensigns on the ground, so to perform the prince's funeral.
And they exit, and we didn't mark that. Yes, there's a queue there for the attendants to exit with that additional body. Basically, we should leave Muly, whoever's Muly, Mahamet, Seth, alone on stage at the very, very end to do that final 5 lines. That seems fair. Alan.
Yeah, I think one thing for the whole act, maybe I haven't looked at the file that Dan shared of the plot, but I think one thing that will be useful will be to go through this act and just look at who is supposed to be on stage at each particular time, because some of the exits and entrances as shown in the stage directions are less than 100% clear. So there is the plot may give us some clues as to who's supposed to be on.
I suspect Dan will answer what I was about to say for me. Go, Dan.
Sadly, Act 5 is one of the parts of the plot that's not existing anymore on it.
Fine. So we would need to recreate that, but I think it would be worth doing, particularly in the Zoom context, because you've got the camera on, camera off thing.
Absolutely.
I mean, we need to make a decision on how many supernumeraries do we want for this scene. Do we keep it tight with the people who are basically directly involved, or do we have an additional army around all the rest of it? Thoughts on that, Dan?
I think that this is where, I mean, obviously we don't have to follow it to the T, but I did give the casting breakdown, the minimum casting breakdown for the Quarto edition, which also the Quarto that's been informed by the plot. And so at least for the way they broke it down was to have 16 actors, and for that final scene they had 14 of them on stage there. It doesn't mean that we have to have everybody there, but at least this is what was indicated by what happened in the Quarto. And the Quarto, I mean, obviously we don't know what the base text was it for it was, but it does seem to indicate that these stage directions, or there's a suggestion that these stage directions were not just strictly authorial, that they might have actually been based on some sort of script that might have been related to a staging of it there.
But we're assuming that all these bodies are actually the people.
Yes.
I mean, as Eric was saying, they could just be dummies. I mean, actually, we don't. This final scene isn't necessarily a barrier to a wider doubling, a slightly more fiddly doubling scheme or not. I don't know if that is taken into account or not. The number of speaking parts is very small in this final scene.
Yeah. So it just, I mean, obviously the plot doesn't indicate, because we don't have that part of it, of who's going to actually be on stage, but considering how many people we actually would have in the cast, I mean, why couldn't we have people out there, as long as it doesn't look silly, I guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing is, I'm just thinking for us in terms of what our logistics might be, as opposed to what a full stage production might be. Because that's the other thing about when we actually can schedule a second look, is when we've got enough bodies and we need to know how many bodies we would actually need. Bodies as opposed being people as opposed to just dead bodies. Lois.
Yeah, there are a couple of points about casting. I mean, one is that whether it's one or two peasants, somebody drags in Muly Mahamet and throws him on the ground. Edward Allen was exceptionally tall for the period, wasn't he? And I suspect that this would have been a difficult thing to do. He appears to be covered with mud, since that's what the peasant says. So I would imagine that is a dummy. And the other thing is a point somebody else has made somewhere about how you double when characters are playing Moors, because presumably they would have had blackened faces. And then can they in fact double anybody else after that?
Yes, I recall there's been some debate on that point in different editions and in other plays as well. And it is a question for us in the future as well, actually, in terms of if we were to do a full production of this, is actually how, second look doesn't is we would be working with who we've got in the room, but obviously if we were doing a proper production, then the casting would be a very, very different proposition. And also there's a whole series of questions about this text overall in terms of what it's saying, the language it's using, and what we would want to be saying in the modern production as well. That's one of the big issues with a play like this, which has some problems, some issues. He said, understating things massively. Dan, then Lois.
Just one more note about the cast list. It does specifically provide, at least based on the evidence, what the doubling would have been, at least for that. Not that we would have that many actors anyway, but that can help solve some of the issues of that. And I mean, in terms of doing effects, so not wearing masks, I have no idea what we would do with that, but just food for thought.
I think I'm going to go back just briefly and just say that we would just get rid of the body of Stukeley. I don't think we need to leave him on stage at all. I think we can happily get rid of that corpse after he dies. Does anyone refer to his corpse being lying there? I don't think anyone did. No, I must have imagined that. That was probably another play where somebody's body got left on stage for the whole damn act.
Take your pick of hundreds.
Yeah, we've done quite a few. That some of them start blurring. So we've
some
more than others. So we've effectively broken this down into 6 units. No, 7 actually. No, we could say quite strongly actually that the re-enter Muly, Mahamet, Seth is a separate scene, and that's actually, we should call that 5-7, Alan.
Okay.
Because if we're not leaving the body on stage, then I think for our purposes we call that a separate unit of action. I mean, in a sense, it's the whole act is one unit of action, or that's how the impression it should give to the audience. Now we have reached the end of our session. We're almost into extra time. The question that Helen raised earlier, and was reiterated with a few other people as well, of the question of, now that we've got a sense of what's happening in the act overall, are there areas we want to flag up and make bigger? Are there battle scenes that fight scenes that we are happy to elide? We don't have to make absolute decisions now. There's essentially an editorial decision that will be made, editorial/directorial decision that will be made prior to the second read through, where I will and others will adjust the text so that we have a clear running order of what's happening, and we'll probably spend at least half an hour just making sure everybody's clear what's happening. But is there anything in here that people feel is vitally important, or bits you feel could go? How do we feel about the Duke of Zareo? Do we need to see his triumphant death, or does the dialogue that follows it, is that sufficient? And there's just a brief sound cue indicating battle. Is that all we need? Other thoughts, other questions, final thoughts about this act overall? Helen first.
Yes, sorry, I put my hand up for the Duke of Alvaro. I think if we're picking 2 fights to show, one would definitely be Stukeley, obviously. Both his death and his fighting off the 2 assailants. Possibly the death of the Duke of Alvaro would be another important one, because the turning point is where it says that the cavalry have failed. That seems to be the turning point of the battle, but that's something we can't show.
Well, it's interesting what the text chooses not to show. You were talking about what about the horse? I mean, they clearly don't have a horse because they describe the incident with the horse in detail later on. So there's clearly the horse is just over there. Which is a shame, because it would be quite nice to show that death scene. It would be quite useful to show that death scene, and in a live stage production, I might be tempted to put it in while they're describing it, and or some kind of set piece that way. There's so many options there. I think the text as it's presenting itself is presenting us actually with not that much in the way of fighty scene action. We have at least simplified a grammar of saying there is a fight scene going, or the indication of with sound, fighting is happening, armies are going on, and then we have very specific fighting moments. The Duke, Stukeley, and Stukeley being stabbed, and I think that's it. I think there's only three sort of bits where we might actually stand and say, right, we need to just choreograph who's doing what and where. The rest could be mostly done with sound cues or slides, just to keep it moving forward, unless people disagree. Lois.
I was just noticing that Sebastian is described as being killed by his guards, which presumably means that he's taken prisoner at some point. This is something that isn't in the stage directions, but that could be, in fact, what happens. I mean, Stukeley could fight off, and drive those two people off stage, and then Sebastian could be completely surrounded by people and simply taken away, and that would make for a different ending, and one that wouldn't risk repetition.
I have to say that's if I was staging on stage, I'd probably do it that way round. I wouldn't have Sebastian exiting and then just randomly dying off stage. I would probably demonstrate his at least capture in somewhere in that melee with Stukeley, probably afterwards as a slightly separate set piece, or maybe in because there are so many little short scenes, the options for additional stage combat are legion. And that's actually what makes this really quite exciting as a physical proposition, because you could have a lot of fun with this. Lois again.
Yeah, I guess the main thing about it is that at the beginning the Christians are winning, and then there's a turning point, and then the Moors are winning, and so I guess you have to have one scene with a lot of people in the Christian uniform, whatever it is, driving the Moors across the stage, and then another scene with the people dressed as Moors driving the Christians across the stage, just to get the idea.
Yeah, it's going to be something, and I think that's one of the stumbling points when we first read it, is actually the clarity of who's on what side. I mean, I think we need to have some rule about what this was mentioned earlier. We did it to a degree with, I think, Geronimo, where it was a matter of, he said, if you're on this side, wear this color, and if you're on that side, wear that color. And that might be a way forward to at least just indicate vaguely which side you're on, if not necessarily the actual precise nationalities that are involved, because as I say, we're working with who we've got at the moment. But a live stage production, the storytelling of whose side is winning at what moment is going to be a really important element to get right. I think we may just have to live with it for a second read and hope for the best. But maybe there are other options. Alexandra.
Yeah, what is happening in terms of who is winning is quite briefly but clearly indicated in those stage directions that we have decided to potentially cut. So I wonder, I wonder whether putting them in as text is enough to kind of indicate that, or just sort of putting in some kind of text that clarifies who is winning, because you have, for instance, in what is now Act 5 Scene 2, and I think might potentially for our purposes if we do something battle wise here, would need to be two separate sections. There is noise, enter to the battle, the Moors fly, skirmish still. So that would be a battle scene, and then enter Abdelmalec in his chair and Zareo and train, and Abdelmalec says, "Say on, tell me all the news." So we've clearly moved away from the battlefield into the tent, as we were talking about earlier. In terms of understanding, the visual understanding of there was fighting and the Moors were losing, and now we're over here telling the king that, is something that I don't see how we could get across over Zoom otherwise. On stage, yes, there is so much opportunity for battle scenes, it's fantastic, yay violence. But for Zoom, even if we did show fighting, I don't think we'd understand who is fighting whom, what camp we're in, what part of the battlefield, who's winning. That's my concern for Zoom.
Yeah. That long skirmish stage direction, you're right, that we basically said we'd ignore. Is potentially on stage, I think, a useful unit of action. I don't think I'd probably split it as a separate scene, but it's a marking point in the middle of the scene because nobody leaves. But yeah, I think the so many opportunities, but so many obstacles, depending on which medium we're working with. I definitely feel closer to being able to do a second look at this play at pace. I definitely feel that we can codify this script in a way that we can get across to people relatively quickly, reading it off a page. And if it's a bit untidy around the edges, then that's life. I mean, we got to acknowledge, several people have hit some of these speeches where there's obviously something missing in the middle of their speech, that there are some odd, if you've got some dots at the side of your speech, that's where it seems like there's some weird cuts have occurred. And how you deal with that is also one of those things of, just act your way through it and hope for the best. So that definitely feels helpful. Other thoughts in the room? Any additional suggestions or thoughts before I close the session? Oh, Eric, saving me from an awkward, lengthy silence.
I was just going to say that it's between the sort of the actual dying and then the bodies being on stage, if you want them to be on Zoom, whatever. They're like, you've got a considerable amount of time, so you can kind of stage it in terms of like having people just lie down and be on camera. Not necessarily a close-up, but just like in the background. I don't know. I mean, obviously I'm filming like in my bedroom, so it's I can pretend like my bed is just like some a platform. But then like sort of I've seen it done where like someone pretending to be a corpse was lying on a couch, for example, and then they just lay there for as opposed to having to sit down and be very, very still while everything is going on. If corpses are on stage. Stage being Zoom.
I mean, following on from Dan's suggestion, and this idea of having, one feed which is doing things like, shots of text, but also, we could effectively have corpse model shots set up with a different coloured cloth draped over it, depending on which person has died, and it can be one person's feed that's doing all of those slightly fiddly things. It's not an individual actor's problem, so when the actor is dead, they're simply replaced with essentially a model shot rather than a full-length thing, and that could be something that we could set up, and might be something that's achievable for a second look. It's one person's job to make sure that works, and everyone else knows that they're being cued into that. Helen?
Yeah, one of the problems with what Eric was saying is Zoom, in that if you're on the other side of the room lying on your bed, it's extraordinarily difficult to turn your video off.
Yeah.
Unless you have a very long stick with your finger attached to the end of it.
I have another laptop for that.
I can use. That's why I like the idea of setting up, a little model stage in front of the camera for shots like that. And that might be something to do. I can get out I'm sure I've got some old action men lying around somewhere, and I can build a set out of Lego or something, or someone else can do that, and we could do something that, and there could be a little slot to put in cards with text on, and that can be cut in as required, or that's a terrible idea that we'll never talk about again. Right, I think that we've covered Act 5 in sufficient detail. Certainly we've got an awful lot of notes made. We've got a potential new draft of a working script that we would work through. Obviously the scene numbers we've invented here are not authoritative. The scholarly edition that I have doesn't have any scene changes at all, and so we wouldn't necessarily refer to these in any detail to the real world, because they're mostly administrative for us. But it was a very useful exercise to try and understand how this act could be broken down, and what these units of actions could mean, and the fact that we don't wholly know or agree precisely what happens with Sebastian, is a really useful indicator that ultimately there are artistic decisions to be made rather than just straightforwardly authorial or scholarly decisions that can come from actual evidence. Sometimes we just make stuff up because it's cool, and that's fine. All that remains is to thank all these wonderful readers and contributors today. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Bye.